I tried so hard to let go, writing poetry and rhymes just to get you off my mind. It's either yes or it's no. I'm not a yo-yo on a string that you flip and twist and swing. I'm not gonna vibe tonight. You don't get everything you like, 'cause I'm not ready. If I'm not ready, I'm not gonna vibe tonight. You don't get everything you like, 'cause I'm not ready. If I'm not ready, second guessing your words, 'cause you choke right when I see that you're all I really need. But if I'm honest, I know this whole thing has been a sign that I'm running out of time. I'm not gonna vibe tonight. You don't get everything you like, 'cause I'm not ready. If I'm not ready, I'm not gonna vibe tonight. You don't get everything you like, 'cause I'm not ready. If I'm not ready, I'm not gonna vibe tonight. You don't get everything you like, 'cause I'm not ready. If I'm not ready, I'm not gonna vibe tonight. You don't get everything you like, 'cause I'm not ready. If I'm not ready, you don't get everything you like, yeah. You don't get everything you like, yeah, 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 yeah. No. I'm not gonna vibe tonight. You don't get everything you like, 'cause I'm not ready. If I'm not ready, I'm not gonna vibe tonight. You don't get everything you like, 'cause I'm not ready. If I'm not ready,
We are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of dreams.
Hey everybody, welcome to Meanwhile Back at the Lab with Paximus and our special guest Ong. It's really great to have you guys here. Thank you so much for spending some time out of your day to be here with me and our special guest. We're going to have a nice conversation over the course of maybe 30 to 45 minutes, something like that. So if you want, go ahead and take some time away from your Pomodoro. We're going to have our own Pomodoro, if you will. And we're just going to get to know Ong a little bit. We're going to be able to ask him questions. Specifically, if you have a question for Ong, please feel free to go ahead and put it in the chat. And if you haven't done so already, I would love for you guys to consider subscribing and liking this video, and then also sharing it with others. And then in the description below, you will see the information for Ong and his live stream. So please feel free to go to his live stream, or should I say his channel, and then be able to subscribe and like his videos. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into our conversation here with none other than Ong. Ong, thank you so much for being here. It's really good to see you, and thank you so much for taking some time to hang out with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Ong, I have just just a couple of prelim questions that I'd love to kind of ask you. And then for those of you who are in the chat, feel free to say hello and any questions you might have for Ong about anything that we're covering or talking about today, please feel free to do so. Just write in all caps the put question, and then put in your question, whatever the question may be. So on, just for those who maybe don't know who you are, and they haven't had the chance to get to know you through your live streams, could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and how you actually started on the YouTube platform?
Yeah, so I'm Ang. Um, I'm a third year medical student in a 4 year graduate entry type medical program. Um, and basically, I'm currently studying in the US, but my school is a British school. So, anyways, we can talk more about that in a bit. But basically, I'm in my third year. I'm doing clinical rotations here in Chicago.
Hmm.
And how did I get started? What was the second part of the question?
Yeah, it's just who you are, what you do, and
Yeah.
how you got into the YouTube platform.
Yeah. So what I do is I do study with me streams, and occasionally I'll publish a video that's more just kind of my digital journal, so to speak. But it's study streams every day, and then a video maybe once every week, every other week, or something like that. And then how I got started on things, well, there's a pandemic, in case people don't know.
Right.
And I think, like many of us, there was a hashtag that was going around for a while with like with me, hashtag with me. And I was like, well, I don't really do anything, but I wonder if there's like a hashtag study with me. And then I was like, oh, so there is a thing.
Oh, crazy.
So yeah, there was a hashtag study with me. And then I started seeing streamers that would do that stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess this is something that I could theoretically do as well, since that like my whole life is this. And at the time, right? So I should probably explain, like before I started streaming, I had a really big issue when it came to like studying at home, in the sense that I've always been one to like leave work elsewhere. So I would be in the library all day or at cafes all day. And that was just like my way of working. And then when I was at home, the work was gone. But being forced to be at home and do work was a new experience for me, and I was like really, really struggling with things. So anyways, pandemic came, hashtag study with me is a thing, and then I let it roll around. Things were getting continually worse with me underperforming where I wanted to be, and then I was like, okay, screw it, let's just hold myself accountable and put myself on stream. And then from there, it's just been a kind of daily thing, because as a medical student, you kind of just have to study every day.
Yeah, and I get the kind of the rigor of that kind of program requires a certain amount of dedication and commitment to studying. Could you tell us a little bit about what that looks like from your experience? Because there's other, students that I've talked with who are in the medical field who I think it just varies. It really does. It depends on the amount that you feel like you need to put in. But I'd love to hear kind of what you've kind of found to work for you, and especially with the study streams, how that helped you with that.
Yeah. I'm going to preface this and say that what works for me is not actually working, in the sense that, like, at least with my case, I definitely feel like there's never enough. I know that you talked with Evelyn a while ago, and there's talking about, and this is something to speak to. I think that, especially as someone who's going to a UK school, but my rotations, so I'm choosing to do my rotations here in the US,
Right.
Meaning I have to take different exams and that sort of thing to be here. I would definitely say that there's a big difference in terms of what we necessarily have to do. So if you ever hear stuff from people doing medical school stuff, I would definitely say that the experience is very different in terms of expectations at even at the same year level between what's expected of the UK program and what a lot of the American students will have to do. Right. So I'm guessing I'm getting a bit off topic here with my situation where it's a bit stressful because I have kind of all the things I required of my UK program, which means my exams and that sort of thing. But at the same time, there are licensing exams that I have to do to stay in the US. And then I also have basically full-time clinical placements.
Okay.
So suffice it to say, there's just a lot to keep track of all the time. And so for me, the default thing is just like, I should probably be studying right now. And everything is kind of weighed against that. Um, but yes, what has worked for me or what I've been doing so far is just try to work a lot and work efficiently. But
You know, in terms of working efficiently, and I'm kind of glad you brought that up, but and you mentioned that you're still kind of like in process, trying to see what works, what doesn't work. Now, your approach to studying, however, um, what do you feel has been working, and maybe something that you try and encourage other people, in case they're coming to your live stream for the very first time. What are some things that you maybe suggest to them to that might help them?
yeah, so when I get this question, usually I say something like, my life philosophy is that you're never right, you're just less wrong with time,
Mm.
meaning that uh, you might be thinking that you're doing something like right and something that works for you, but that's not to say that like there isn't something better. And I
Mhm.
think that with everything, you look back 5 years at your Facebook post and you cringe, even though you thought you were super intelligent or whatever the case is.
Right.
Um, so, anyways, my point here is like the things that work for me might not work for you, and I'm not saying that they're right at all.
Mhm.
But with that said, the general principle is obviously, well, the thing that goes around is that the more active your process is, the better things are.
Mhm.
So, instead of passively reading your textbook or whatever, you can
Mhm.
take notes, which is a little bit more active. But instead of taking notes, you can escalate that to making questions and then doing practice questions. And then to build in the efficiency, you have things like spaced repetition. And
Mm.
I've looked into your background a bit, so I'm sure you know quite a bit about the idea of like efficient learning principles of active learning and spaced repetition. It's
Sure.
basically the
Yeah.
core of
But
modern
I
learning.
I noticed in the medical field, I could be wrong, so feel free to push back on this. But I've talked with some other students who said that Anki is like their lifesaver. They swear by it. Is this something that you actually do enjoy? When, or should I say, perhaps not even enjoy, but feel efficient in your studying habits, or is that something that you don't do and you do something else?
Yeah. Um, I think that that is echoed for me for sure, where
Mm.
like Anki is, yeah, Anki is the lifesaver. It's foundational in the sense that like it's also habitual, where it's like we know that there's a lot of information and like theoretically you can get through all of it in, you know, not that much time, but the thing is that you have to actually retain it all.
Yeah.
And that's where the spaced repetition of Anki comes in.
Mm-hmm.
With that said, um, personally, where I feel like I've messed up is I've definitely gone to the point where like Anki might be overdone, or I'm just not very efficient at
Mm-hmm.
getting through my cards compared to. Uh, there's a stat that you'll have. It's called like cards per minute, and
Okay.
I'm definitely on the slower side of things. So it takes me a long time to get through it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that means that I've had to compromise on another important thing, which many people will swear by is the fact that, and it's probably even more important than Anki if you have to pick one, and
Mm-hmm.
that's doing practice questions.
Mm-hmm.
Because the whole thing is you should be training for the sport that you're going to do. And the closest thing to practicing for the exam is actually doing practice questions, which are like a practice exam.
Mm.
Uh, so for me, I'm trying to find a balance between trying to get through my review materials and also getting the repetitions I need in terms of actually answering questions based on what I've learned and
Right.
applying it.
Yeah. So I just want to do a quick shout out to the people here in chat. Thank you so much for being here. Moni, Sarah, thank you so much for being here. D, it's good to see you as well. Tiffany has a question. Thanks, Tiffany, for your question. But third med student here too. How do you do your clinical rotations nowadays? Do you still meet with real patients? Thanks for the question, Tiffany.
Uh, yeah. For me, I don't know how it's like in the rest of the world right now, to be honest, because
Mm,
again, with busyness, I always make the joke. It's like, oh, what do you do for fun? It's like or what do you do outside of medicine? I was like, I don't have a life anymore. Medicine took that away from me. But no, I mean, it's a half joke, but like, it's actually really sad. But
Mm,
um, uh, where was I going with this? Do I still meet with patients? So yeah, everything's basically the same except for the fact that we wear masks and you get asked if you got vaccinated. But I mean,
right.
pretty much it's all the same except that we all wear masks.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want any specifics on how clinical rotations are done, I guess I can answer that. But it's basically how it's always been plus masks.
Right. So, if Tiffany, if you have any other specific questions, or anybody else who's listening right now and watching this, if you have any questions, feel free to put in the word question. Of course, I have my set of questions, but I'd like to interweave, the people's questions that are in chat. So, I'm kind of curious, what was the thing for you to kind of get started into the medical field? Like, what was the interest? What drew you? Was it at an early age, or was it most like recent before you got into the program?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So and it's a pretty long-winded one, so forgive me if this is a bit long.
We got time.
Uh, um, so I would probably say that the the goal, or rather, yeah, the goal to be a doctor was something that was created before I existed, in the sense that like the color of my skin is Asian, and Asian household. Father is also a doctor.
Mm.
Stuff like literally come out of the womb. It's like, oh, I mean, they make the joke. You come out of the womb. It's like, oh, you're going to be a doctor, right? And it's like, oh, okay. So, um, anyways, I would say that my parents have always said that, and like for me, I think that in general, my life has been very much. I would say I'm a very low key person, or not particularly picky, where it's just like, okay, sure. I mean, seems okay. I'm not, and to me, the biggest thing is like reducing friction. It's like, okay, if you want this for me, I don't have a huge objection to it. And like, I would rather not argue about this sort of thing.
Mm.
So whatever, I'll pursue it. But with that said, so I mean, for the longest time, it was just like the path of least resistance, living with my parents or whatever the case was.
Mm.
Um, but and that's interesting because like getting into medical school is not an easy process,
Right.
but it was still the path of least resistance when you live with people
Mm.
every day. And the other thing is that, right, so that was the case up until it actually came to me like afterwards, being in medical school. And like once I was in, I guess I had a bit more time to think about things. And it was just like, I guess I can never verbalize it on why there are aspects of it that I enjoyed even before, but like it's something big. And I just released it yesterday, a video on this. But
Mhm.
basically, I feel like I'm definitely in medicine now because of suffering. It's like, why do you go into medicine? To suffer,
Mm.
which is an interesting thing to say. And this is where it gets a bit long winded. But there's this concept called the hedonic treadmill, which is the fact that basically we're always going to feel the spectrum of emotions from happiness to sadness, and regardless of what happens to us a lot of the times. Uh, and even from a medical perspective, if you're constantly happy or in a constant high state or a constantly low state, like depression,
Mm.
both of which are considered pathological. So as a result of that, there's just a realization that you're always going to feel the spectrum of things. And it kind of goes along with this idea of like monkey brain, where there's a theory that we've survived as long as we have because we were able to see challenges in our environment and adapt and so forth. But
Mm.
and nowadays, when we don't have like a tiger to run from, it's when monkey brain has no problems, it makes problems. So I would definitely say that I like medicine because it gives me a real problem to worry about. So instead of thinking about like, oh, my coffee is too cold, I don't have a Lamborghini, I don't have servants or a huge mansion, I would rather be thinking about the suffering of patients. Like I really enjoy cancer and oncology for that reason, because we
Mm.
tend to really shut up about our problems when we hear about a person. It's like, oh, I'm sorry that your coffee's a bit too cold, but my hair is falling out and I'm puking all over the place and I
Right.
have constipation and I'm
Yeah.
constantly in pain. So I think that I like medicine because it's incredibly grounding in the sense that this is a real thing to struggle with, and there are real problems out there,
Mm,
and the real problems that I would like to address with the energy I have, rather than perhaps a lot of things that are actually not all that important,
mm-hmm,
like living in a huge mansion and
mm-hmm,
having everything served to me.
right.
So yeah, I like medicine because it shows me a lot of suffering, and it's something that keeps me motivated to actually work on a problem I care about.
Mm. And I think that's people just caring for people in general and having that. I would even go as far as to say, somewhat empathetic. Realizing that it's okay that I don't have like the strongest cup of coffee right now, but like someone who is a patient of mine would be dealing with even something so severe as mental health. Mental health is what we had kind of talked a little bit about in just previous podcasts, but I bring up mental health quite often because that's a real thing, and I'd love to hear a little bit more from you on that. But Tracy Arnold Chapman from the chat, thank you, Tracy, for hanging out with us. I'm a grad student. There is literally no end to the work I need to do. Advice on staying sane when the workload is so extreme, never ending. Advice on mental health. Thank you so much, Tracy, for your question.
Mm. Okay. Big
And that's a
question.
heavy
And
loaded question, but it's a really great
yeah,
question.
yeah. No, it is a great question. Again, I would say like I'm never right, just less wrong with time. And I can only say what has helped me do things. And I hope to be less wrong with time. But anyways, what I would say is struggling with like an endless workload. I can definitely feel like I relate to that. Um, and I tell people, regardless what you get on your test, you pass, you failed. If you did your best, there's really nothing more to be done. So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I would just say, um, pace yourself in a way that is optimal for you. Because
Mm-hmm.
obviously, if you try and do everything and burn out, even looking from a productivity standpoint, you end up doing worse because you'll have that huge peak and then you'll just drop off.
Mm-hmm.
It's that whole idea of like, Mark, I guess like people in business, they talk about like the best kinds of investments are ones that are slow growing, but they grow nonetheless. And that's ultimately what leads to the best returns on things.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess in terms of getting through the endless work, piece by piece, step by step, don't worry about the big picture on like things. Just do your best. And even if your best is, short of the outcome, like there's nothing more to be done because you gave your best.
Mm.
So just live with the comfort that you gave your best. But yeah, no, mental health is tough.
Yeah, and I think for me, just to kind of maybe echo some of that, and but also to add, just with mental health, because there are so many of us who unfortunately deal with different types of health issues when it comes to that, and whether you deal with anxiety or depression or maybe even physical ailments. The physical ailments sometimes can actually be manifested through these mental health issues. I know that there's a couple of friends of mine, me included, who right before a test, you get so amped up sometimes, or right before a big presentation, you get so amped that you get so anxious, and then you get so panicked, and there's this like there's this worry that, oh my gosh, what happens if I don't do well on my presentation or my homework or my test or something, like what's going to happen. And just what Ong is saying, I think, is do the best you can, because there's always going to be an opportunity to study for the test again. And I understand that sometimes we think, well, it's just time is of the essence. We have like a plan that we need to stick with, because otherwise I can't get this job or I can't do this. And I would say, like, along with what Ong says, is just be able to do the best you can, and hopefully try not to stress too much about hitting 100% on a test. If you get 90, that's great. You move forward. I would encourage anybody out there who is taking a test or working on homework, or especially the workload in Tracy's case, I would make a list of things that you need to get done, prioritize the ones that are hardest, maybe the things that are difficult to maybe kind of wrap your head around, and then just little by little, take what steps you need to do to get all that stuff done. So, yeah, and thank you, Tracy, for your question. Really do appreciate it. And uh, with this whole issue on about mental health, because it is kind of an issue, especially for me. I deal with clinic. I've been clinically, diagnosed with depression, panic attack disorder, generalized anxieties, stuff like that. It's kind of interesting to me because trying to prepare for a test or an exam, something like that, sometimes doesn't always freak me out. It's just the process of, like, once I'm taking the test, I'm fine. It's getting there, that's where I struggle with it. I don't know about you, but like throughout, especially this year of the lockdowns and everything like that, have you encountered yourself in a position where you noticed that your mental health was starting to get affected because you weren't doing your normal routine, or was this year somewhat normal for you, aside from the fact that it is a pandemic, if that makes sense?
Um, so I guess yeah, I guess I could probably speak on like the mental health aspect of it. Um, I was going a bit insane like in the beginning with like getting used to lockdown,
Mm,
um, and just trying to get things done. And like, but to be honest, this is actually probably an interesting thing where I would say that the pandemic has like the lockdowns helped me study a lot in a lot of ways, because what that meant was, so I guess I should probably explain. This year I wrote, you might have heard of it. It's called the USMLE, the United States Medical Licensing Exam, the
mm-hmm.
first step of it.
Yeah.
Um, and typically, most people write it at the end of their second year. And many people consider this basically the worst part of medical school, because it's just very, very, it's a lot of material, a lot of things that you have to do for it.
Mm,
And it's very common for people to just be like, yeah, I did 12-hour days for like several months at a time.
yeah.
And uh, so I guess where I was going with this was the fact that it's very hard to get 12 hours of studying in when you have a commute, when you have classes, um, and especially in my case as a UK student, it's a bit different. Where in the US, if I was a student, the first 2 years, from what I understand, are basically all are 95+% lectures.
Mm,
In our case, that's only the case for the first year, and then it's 50% clinical, 50% lecture based.
mm-hmm.
So it's really, really stressful trying to juggle an exam when you have a lot less time to study for it. But where I was going with this was the fact that because of the lockdown, we were able to have all these online lectures.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a result of that, what that meant was I would not watch anything live, and I would watch everything at 2 or 3 times speed, so I could get more time in the day. And also no commutes, meaning that I could just be on stream for like 10 hours or whatever the case was on days I didn't have to do clinic.
Right.
Um, but in terms of emotionally, what has happened, uh, I don't know if it would necessarily be because of like the pandemic, because I think that if I was studying for this exam, and basically everybody who goes through this of having to like study for 12 hours plus a day um, for months on end, you're not going out anyways during the time. So I think that whether or not there was stuff going on or not, I wouldn't be there. But emotionally, that's been very difficult for me this year, because it takes a toll on you to study all day, every day, medicine, you know, several hours back to back to back. But yeah, I guess this speaks to how I've coped with things. And I make the joke that I'm just dead inside, but like the reality is like I I think a legitimate way that I've coped with being a medicine is just being numb, where it's like I think that you can acknowledge like anxiety is a real thing, and it's fine to be anxious and stuff like that, but it's not productive to have these kinds of emotions, and if anything, it hinders your ability to work. A lot of people feel like, oh, I need the anxiety to push me to go, but like, and I can see how that might be the case, but there are certain times when like people can be too anxious about an exam to even study, or too worried about things or have too many thoughts. So that's why I kind of have just detached from the emotions, and it's like, oh, I got to do this thing. Feeling anything isn't going to really do anything at this moment. Just focus on the here and now. Take it as it is. But with that said, when I was telling this to somebody, I was like, hey, it's not like depression or anything. And it's like, no, I wouldn't call it depression. It's just, like, I don't know, just don't feel anything,
Yeah. But I wanted to ask you also. Now, what for you would be, now being a third year medical student? Like, what are some things that you can tell us about the kind of the journey for you, as realizing like, okay, I really want to go into medicine now, and this is really interesting, because I could be complaining or talking about other things that really don't matter, but at the end of the day, like, patients matter, and caring for someone who has cancer and stuff like that. What is the specific area of interest for you? And then leaving medical school, like, what are some plans that you have?
Yeah. So what is the plan for me afterwards medical school? So at this point, my particular interest is in, we call it internal medicine, and basically that's your generic adult doctor who deals with your normal stuff broadly, right? And that's a 3-year residency program. So I'm planning on applying to the US as my primary thing. Not because I have anything against going back to the UK or anything like that. It's just the fact that the training programs are a lot faster. So in the US, if I want to be an internist, it would take me 3 years. But in the UK, it can take 7 years plus.
Whoa.
So, I mean, 3 versus 7.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I get that.
So
like, let me know if I carry my one,
yeah. So it's more a time thing for me, and that's kind of my plan. Because I mean, there's the two big divisions if you look at like medicine and surgery type of thing. Obviously, there's stuff like obstetrics and stuff like that, but medicine is where I'm interested in, and maybe down the road, oncology, hematology oncology. So again, the way it works with internal medicine is you're kind of a generalist with everything, and then you do additional training afterwards, which we call fellowships. And so that's where you can be hematologist, oncologist, gastroenterologist, cardiologist, all these kinds of specialties. And again, in the UK, that would be like 9 years as opposed to like the 5 years it would take.
Now I'm curious to know though, like, what's the like, why the big difference between the 3 and 7 year? Like, what's the program? The UK program. Why is it like that versus US?
Yeah. So it's more because the way it works in the UK is you do something which you might have heard the phrase called foundation years. Afterwards, you graduate. So basically, the way it works is when you finish medical school, you earn the title of doctor, and then afterwards that you need training in whatever specialty you go into.
Right.
In the UK, before you pick a specialty, unlike in the US, whether you want to you decide right after medical school whether you want to go into surgery or obstetrics or neurology or internal medicine. In the UK, afterwards medical school, you spend another 2 years kind of just being a generalist doctor in the hospital. The term you might hear, we don't exactly have an equivalent for it in North America, but it would be similar to like a hospitalist.
Okay.
So just the doctor that works in the hospital doing general stuff like that. And then afterwards so after 2 more years, you pick what specialty you want to do. And that's either medicine or surgery or whatever the case is. So by default, you're automatically adding 2 to whatever it is. So family medicine would be like 3 years in the US, and it's also 3 years in the UK, except you had to do 2 extra foundation years in the UK. So that's the big thing. And then in terms of program discrepancy of like why medicine is 5 years versus 3 years
Mm-hmm.
in the UK versus US. I don't know the specific details,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it has something to do with the fact that, like, in the UK, people who go into general medicine or internal medicine, uh, they generally specialize. As far as from what I've heard, again, this is further down the line, and I haven't researched that far into it because it's not ideally where I would want to go, because I know it's going to take longer. But most people don't stop as at internist. They generally go a little bit further and become internists or whatever the case is.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there's also just philosophy stuff where, like, I don't know, maybe in the US we're a lot more set on this idea of like being what we call an attending, which is like the highest level once you've done all your training and everything and getting there. Whereas in the UK, it's pretty normal to start up your family once you're earning money and stuff like that, because throughout all of this postgraduate training, you're earning money. And yeah, I don't know, maybe in the UK, there's just a bit more on like this lifelong learning, and it's not necessarily about being at the top of the top in terms of your training or at the end of the training, really.
Yeah.
But again, it's different systems.
Yeah. And for those of you who are listening in or just joining us in, you can go ahead and if you have a question, put in all caps question, and then any question you have for Ong. We're gonna ask maybe just a few more questions, and then we'll kind of end our time here. But so I'm kind of curious. You've mentioned in in the conversation so far that like what you want to kind of specialize in internal medicine, and being able to do that and practice that, and doing that in the U.S. is probably a little bit more expedited, if you will,
Yeah,
than the
exactly.
UK. But I do have to ask, because we like, I'd like to kind of see what are some other interests that you do have. So some things that you actually do enjoy, aside from maybe like live streaming, being a study streamer and everything like that, and whatever that comes with. Like, is there any other general interests that you have, like technology or anything like that? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I make the joke of like, I don't have a life. Medicine took it for me. But I mean, like, obviously, cool gadgets in the form of technology are cool to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, there's the live stream stuff. Other than that, like, I definitely feel like my life has been optimized around trying to perform best in medicine. So if it's downtime to optimize for studying, or it's getting enough sleep so that I can, consolidate my study efforts effectively and be ready to study more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, in terms of interests, um, I'm not keeping up with it very much. But I guess I haven't explained it. But like before this, I did a little bit of research in terms of what we call like angiogenesis, which is the growth of new blood vessels.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess just to give a quick summary of things, basically with tumors, if you have cancer, one of the big things that needs to happen to keep a tumor alive is it needs blood. It needs oxygen from blood and nutrients and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that's a potential therapeutic is like, if we can stop tumors from growing blood vessels, then the tumor cells will die. That said, so I have an interest in terms of like cancer and that sort of thing, which is why I say after internal medicine, I kind of have, there's a little bit of a temptation to go into the hematology oncology side of things
Mm-hmm.
afterwards to specialize. One, also because, I mean, you've heard my whole suffering thing, and I think that nothing exemplifies it better, at least to society, about having real problems than cancer. And then the other thing is like, yeah, I would be interested in doing research. And I think I'm not sure at this point, but it seems like it would be easier to do if I went into oncology.
Mm-hmm.
But all this aside, so yes, research is a little bit of an interest of mine. And then the other hobbies, aside from when I need to get away from medicine, obviously I watch TV. If you look at my Instagram, it's all food. I am kind of known in my program for like, kind of just being like a human vacuum, where I can do really large food challenges. At
Wow.
least, I mean, nothing competitive, but like,
So,
I
but you
am,
can actually like consume quite a bit.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. I
I've
am,
always been kind of like shocked and amazed at people who are able to like take huge amounts of food, eat and just not have any issues with that. Like I eat a little bit, just a little bit, and I'm like dying inside. So I'm kind of curious, is that you haven't done like competitions or anything like that, have you?
No, not competitions, but like it's more like if we go out, it's like uh, I will always be the last one standing by the end, and it's just for fun with like messing with friends and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, that said, there have been times like you get the ego gets the best of you, and then of course you want to out eat the other person, but like it takes its toll, and then you can't even stand by the end of it, like you're
Yeah.
hunched over in pain,
Right.
like. Um, but with that said, no, I mean when it comes to like eating like that, I would call myself a social eater,
Yeah,
similar to how
I've
people.
actually heard that quite a few times. um,
So that's
yeah, and now I'm kind of curious to just kind of wrap up our time. If if we have no more questions in the chat, which by the way, if you do, please feel free to put that in. But just to maybe wrap up my set of questions for you. Now, when it comes to
mhm.
health, we've talked about mental health and what that looks like, but maybe in the practical sense for you of like sleep. How important is sleep for a medical student for you, and just in general, what's your thinking on that?
uh, I mean, it's pretty trendy, or it's come into the popular culture about the importance of sleep, and like, no, there's no sense in like. I think there's that whole argument of like trying to get more hours studying at the expense of sleep is often like picking up pennies while there's dollars in the wind, or whatever the
Mm,
phrase was I heard. Um, so yeah, I think that optimizing your sleep is probably one of the most productive things that you can do, or at least that's what I've been told. But I can probably attest to that. So like, uh, I'm not a fan of like cutting into my sleep for studies, but I do recognize sometimes it's necessary where it's like, I mean, there's the whole thing of like, it's probably better the night before your exam to get the sleep you need rather than trying to cram all night and
mm-hmm.
like perform very poorly on the day of the exam because you need to rest up. Um, but at the same time, obviously, there's always an exception to the rule. Like if you have done nothing up till the night of the exam, then it's like you're not consolidating any memories if you're going to sleep anyways. So I guess sure, why not? But like hopefully you're not in that position. I would say in most cases, sleep, if you're being responsible about your studies, is the most efficient thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and again, I guess I haven't mentioned it here, but my background, right? Because like the way I got into medical school was after doing a first degree. So my first degree was in kinesiology and health science,
Oh, okay.
study of movement. So like, I kind of look at studying similar to human performance in that sense,
Mm-hmm.
where like you need reps, you need to have spaced repetition to get stronger, if you want, or whatever the case is, and you need high quality reps. But at the same time, you need rest days, and not having those rest days are important. Not having those rest days are detrimental to your performance. And obviously, again, if you have a sporting event, if the game is tomorrow, you're not going to go all out on the training session the night before,
Mm-hmm.
So I
You know,
would, all this to say, sleep is important.
you know what? And you touch on the subject of performance, and now that shouldn't be a big deal when we're like study streaming, but that kind of is in some shape, way, or form, I suppose. There is some sort of connotation attached to us as study streamers being able to perform, by putting something on camera, putting ourselves up on camera. And Olivia asks a question: a study streamer, does it get overwhelming at times knowing that someone is watching you study for hours, and does it ever get tiring?
um, I would probably say that uh, whatever things that have been tiring from the study stream, uh, I think that I mean, obviously I get tired on stream sometimes. And like, there have been times where I've like basically blacked out in the middle of like my blog. But I would say that so I should probably say that like, for me, I don't have a study schedule. I'm just kind of on every day at some point out of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
So that probably helps alleviate some of the stress of like, oh, I don't need to sit down at the specific time for 12 hours, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's probably how I would cope with things. But in terms of people watching me, I don't know. I kind of like it in the sense that like, if I don't have the study stream, like I've used Pomodoro before in the past before,
Mm-hmm.
like the pandemic and before all of this stuff. But the real thing is that you know, you get through your 50 or 60-minute block to actually take 10 minutes and then decide to get back. It's a very difficult thing for me if I don't have the stream. And that's the big challenge. So I actually really enjoy having people there and chatting. It's like, you know, if you're sticking too long, it's like, hey, 10 minutes are up. It's like, oh, okay. All right, time to go back and do the next block. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that being a steady streamer has definitely been more helpful than hurtful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so, guys, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with me and Ong, just being able to get to know Ong a little bit. And, you know, we generally we do these podcasts on Wednesdays. So that's Wednesdays, and the time varies. So if you ever need to go ahead and you can look in the description below. In the description below, we have Ong's information, his Discord, Instagram, and of course his YouTube channel. Please do go subscribe to his YouTube channel. And we will be back on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, to have another conversation with Sven Lauers, who's Sven Lauers studying. And for those who might not know, he's going to be our next guest. And but Ong, I just want to take some time real quick to say thank you for your time. Thank you for having just a nice conversation with us for a little bit, getting to know you and what you do on your YouTube channel and things like that. And I really hope that, you know, we're able to you know, maybe have this conversation on maybe other topics in the future.
Yeah, no, for sure. This has been fun. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to have talked with you.
Yeah. So, guys, thank you. For those of you who are watching, thank you so much for subscribing and liking and sharing this. And please feel free at the end of this live to hit us up in the comments after this live and tell us a little bit about, you know, what you're studying, what you do, and then maybe how this conversation encouraged you or inspired you in some way. And I want to say thanks to Billy, who is actually one of the steady streamers that we're going to be interviewing in a couple of weeks. So that'll be really cool to be able to have that conversation with you, Billy. And Selkit, thank you so much for being here. Moni, thank you so much for being here. Olivia, Tracy, Sarah, thank you guys so much for hanging out here. And remember, be kind and rewind. I'll see you later. Have a good one.